November 1997, 2:47 a.m. A Royal Protection Officer's phone explodes with an emergency call. Queen Elizabeth II is demanding an unscheduled visit, now. The security team scrambles. There's no protocol for this. An elderly World War II veteran, hours from death, has requested an audience with the monarch. The hospital staff is panicking. The ward isn't prepared for royalty. Nurse Sarah Matthews is still in her scrubs, hasn't slept in 19 hours. The dying soldier is clutching something in his hand, refusing to let go. The Queen's motorcade is already en route. What that soldier carried would shatter every assumption about duty, memory, and the hidden life of the most photographed woman in the world. Royal historians still debate what happened in that room. Subscribe now, because what she did next violated 5 separate protocols and changed everything. James William Hartley was 76 years old when he was admitted to the Royal Hospital, Chelsea in November 1997. Terminal pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him weeks, maybe days. He'd served in World War II, D-Day, Normandy, the whole brutal march through France, decorated twice, 5 grandchildren. A wife he'd lost 2 years earlier to a stroke. He arrived at the hospital with almost nothing. A change of clothes, reading glasses, a photograph of his late wife, and one other thing. Nurse Sarah Matthews noticed it during intake. A handkerchief, white linen, embroidered with a royal monogram. It looked old, carefully preserved, but unmistakably authentic. Matthews had worked in military hospitals long enough to recognize palace inventory when she saw it. She asked Hartley about it. He smiled, lucid despite the pain, and told her a story. June 1944. He'd been wounded at Normandy, evacuated back to London for emergency surgery. A few weeks later, still recovering, he'd been invited to a brief palace ceremony. Decorated soldiers, each one personally thanked by Princess Elizabeth, then just 18 years old. Hartley had been bleeding through his bandages during the ceremony. The young princess noticed. She'd quietly pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve and pressed it into his hand. "Keep it," she'd said. "You've earned far more than this." Hartley carried that handkerchief through 53 years. Through marriage, through raising 2 daughters, through burying his wife. Now, dying, he wanted to return it. Personally. Sarah Matthews took the request seriously. Her colleagues thought she was indulging a dying man's fantasy. The hospital administrator laughed outright. Absolutely impossible. Royal protocol required months of vetting for audience requests. Hartley had days, maybe hours. But Matthews made the call anyway, unauthorized, reckless. She dialed the palace switchboard, expecting immediate rejection. Instead, she was transferred. 3 times. Finally, she reached someone in the private secretary's office. Matthews explained the situation. Dying D-Day veteran, borrowed handkerchief from 1944, wanted to return it before he died. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, "We'll need to verify the item. Can you photograph it?" Matthews sent the image within minutes. The embroidery matched palace inventory from the 1940s. 48 hours later, the palace called back. The voice was calm, precise. "Her Majesty will visit. Tell no one. Prepare the ward quietly." Matthews nearly dropped the phone. The request had been approved, but there was a condition. Total secrecy. No press. Time 0.5s. No announcement. No official record. November 23, 1997. 6 p.m. The hospital received a coded message. The visit was scheduled for 2:30 a.m., late enough to avoid press, public, and most protocol officers. Only 3 people were informed: Matthews, the head nurse, and the hospital director. Normal visiting hours ended at 8. The ward had to appear completely routine. No special cleaning, no flags, no ceremony, just another night shift. Hartley's condition was deteriorating rapidly. He might not survive until morning. Matthews spent the evening keeping him as comfortable as possible, trying to keep him alert. He clutched the handkerchief constantly, drifting in and out of consciousness. Every time he woke, he asked the same question: "Is she really coming?" Matthews lied. Rest now. Everything's arranged. Midnight arrived. Hartley's vitals started dropping, heart rate erratic, oxygen levels falling. Matthews called the palace emergency line. He might not make it. The response was immediate. She's already en route. At 2:15 a.m., Royal Protection officers arrived. Silent. Efficient. The Queen was traveling without any official record. The court circular would never mention this visit. 2:34 a.m. An unmarked vehicle pulled into the hospital's service entrance. No flags. No ceremonial dress. Queen Elizabeth II stepped out wearing a plain dark coat, flanked by 2 protection officers and 1 lady-in-waiting. The hospital director met them at the door, hands visibly shaking. The Queen's first words weren't about protocol. Which room? How is he? She walked briskly through the corridor, clearly familiar with military hospitals. Matthews was waiting outside Hartley's door. Brief introduction. The Queen asked about his condition directly. Fading, Your Majesty. But he's awake. He's been waiting. The Queen paused for just a moment, straightened her shoulders, and said quietly, "He shouldn't have had to wait this long." Then she entered the room. Alone. The protection officers stayed outside. No witnesses, no official account. Inside, Hartley tried to sit up when he saw her. He couldn't. The Queen's response was immediate. "Please, don't. Stay comfortable." She pulled a chair to his bedside. No ceremony. No distance. Just 2 people in a small hospital room at nearly 3 in the morning. Hartley's hand trembled as he held out the handkerchief. "Your Highness, I meant to return this 1944. The Queen took it gently, unfolding the linen with care. Recognition flashed across her face. "I remember," she said. "You were bleeding. Normandy, wasn't it?" Hartley nodded, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. The Queen continued softly. "You were so young. We all were." She held his hand. The handkerchief rested between their palms. Outside, Matthews watched through a small gap in the doorway. She'd expected a 5-minute courtesy visit. The Queen stayed. 15 minutes. 30. 45. Inside that room, something extraordinary was happening. The Queen wasn't performing a duty. She was listening. Hartley talked about D-Day, about friends he'd lost, about the guilt of survival, things he'd never told his family. The Queen responded with her own memories. London during the bombings, waiting for news from the front, the fear that never quite left. 2 people who had lived through the same era but in completely different worlds. And now, in this moment, those worlds had collapsed into one small room. An hour passed. Hartley's breathing grew more labored. The Queen noticed but didn't move to leave. Instead, she leaned closer. "What else do you need to say?" Hartley's voice was barely a whisper now. He mentioned his wife, gone 2 years. His children were busy. His grandchildren, distant. "I'm ready to go," he said. "I just wanted to finish this." The Queen nodded slowly. You've served with honor. Your duty is complete." Time 8:05. Matthews, still watching from the doorway, saw Hartley's face relax. It was as if he'd been given permission. Permission to let go. The Queen wasn't functioning as a monarch in that moment. She was something else, a witness, a presence, almost spiritual. She stayed. The protection officer appeared briefly at the door, giving a subtle signal about time. The Queen waved him off without looking. Another 20 minutes passed, mostly silence now. Hartley's eyes would close, then open again, searching for confirmation that she was still there. She was, always. The Queen still held the handkerchief, turning it over slowly in her hands. She noticed a small detail, a faded bloodstain from 1944, never, washed out. And something else. Initials embroidered in the corner. Not hers. Hartley's wife's. She added her mark to mine, the Queen observed quietly. Hartley's eyes opened. He smiled weakly. 1950. My wife knew the story. She wanted to be part of it. His voice cracked. 2 women who loved me. The Queen carefully refolded the handkerchief and placed it back in his hand. This belongs to you. To your wife. To your service. Keep it. Hartley protested, barely audible. But it's yours. The Queen was firm. It was mine for one day. It's been yours for 53 years. The protection officer reappeared at the door, another subtle signal. The Queen waved him off again. She stayed. Another 20 minutes. The room was almost completely silent now, except for the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor and Hartley's increasingly shallow breathing. Matthews checked her watch. 4:17 a.m. She entered the room quietly, checking the monitors. The numbers were falling. The Queen looked up. Is it time? Matthews nodded. Very soon, ma'am. The Queen turned back to Hartley and said softly, I'm here. You're not alone. Hartley's eyes opened one last time. He tried to speak. The Queen leaned in close, her ear near his mouth. Matthews couldn't hear the words. Whatever Hartley said, it was meant only for the Queen. She listened, then responded quietly, Yes, I will. I promise. Hartley exhaled. It was 4:23 a.m. His final breath was peaceful. The Queen remained seated, still holding his hand. Matthews stood in the doorway, unsure of protocol. There was no protocol for this. The Queen finally stood, slowly and carefully placed the handkerchief on Hartley's chest, right over his heart. She turned to Matthews. Her eyes were wet. He served his country with honor. Please ensure his family knows that. Matthews nodded, unable to speak. It was the first time she'd ever seen the Queen cry. The Queen composed herself, walked to the door, and paused. Thank you for calling us, for giving him this. Then she was gone. By 4:35 a.m. the Queen had left the building. The sky was still dark. No press ever learned of the visit. Matthews wrote an incident report and marked it confidential. The hospital director filed it in restricted archives. The official cause of death, natural causes, peaceful passing. The unofficial truth, James William Hartley died with the Queen of England holding his hand. The visit was erased from the official record. It existed only in memory. December 2, 1997. Hartley's funeral was scheduled for a small parish church in Chelsea. His family expected maybe 30 mourners, old veterans, a few neighbors. The morning of the service, the palace called. Her Majesty requests to attend. She knew your father. Hartley's 2 daughters were stunned. They hadn't known about the handkerchief, the 1944 ceremony, any of it. They searched their father's belongings and found the handkerchief in his bedside drawer. There was a note attached, written in a nurse's handwriting, returned with honor, November 23, 1997. The funeral proceeded as planned. A back pew was mysteriously reserved. At 11:45 a.m., an unmarked car pulled up. The Queen entered alone and sat in the back of the church. No announcement. No fanfare. The vicar wasn't even aware of her presence. The service continued. Hymns, prayers, a brief eulogy from Hartley's older daughter. The Queen stayed for the entire service, then followed the procession to the graveside. After the burial, she approached Hartley's daughters. Your father was a remarkable man. She handed them a sealed envelope. Then she left quietly, before any press could arrive. The daughters opened the envelope later, in private. Inside was the handkerchief, blood-stained, 2 sets of initials carefully embroidered, and a letter. The letter was handwritten. The Queen's own script. It recounted everything, the 1944 meeting, Hartley's wounds, her offering of the handkerchief. It described the November 23rd hospital visit in careful detail. Your father carried this through 53 years of service, love, and honor, she wrote. He returned it to me in his final hours, the greatest gift I have ever received. But it belongs with his family now, as a reminder of his character. He died peacefully, knowing his duty was complete. I was honored to be present. Please keep this, and remember him as I will. The letter was signed simply. Elizabeth R. Hartley's daughters realized what had happened. The Queen had broken protocol for their father. A secret 3 a.m. visit. Private attendance at his funeral. A personal letter. This story could have made headlines across the world. They chose silence, out of respect for their father's dignity, out of respect for the Queen's privacy. The handkerchief was placed carefully in the family archive, along with the letter. The greatest royal story of that year was never publicly told, not for 2 decades. Sarah Matthews signed a confidentiality agreement with a 20-year restriction. She carried the secret through the rest of her nursing career into retirement. In 2017, the restriction expired. Matthews was 63. She gave an interview to a military history documentation project. For the first time, she revealed the full story. She explained why she'd broken protocol to make that phone call. Something in his eyes, she said. He'd carried that handkerchief through everything: war, marriage, loss. Returning it wasn't about royalty. It was about finishing something that had been unfinished for 53 years. She described the Queen's demeanor that night: focused, compassionate, unhurried. She didn't treat him like a subject. She treated him like he mattered. Because he did. The interview was archived and largely went unnoticed at first. The palace never commented. They confirmed nothing, denied nothing. But other veterans began coming forward with similar stories. The pattern became clear. Queen Elizabeth II had regularly broken protocol to visit dying servicemen in private. Matthews's revelation had opened a door to a hidden history, a side of the monarchy the public had never seen. The visits were always secret, always at night, always personal. September 2022. Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle. Tributes flooded in from around the world. Public service, duty, dignity. Sarah Matthews, now 68, watched the coverage from her home. She thought about November 1997, about that hospital corridor at 2:47 a.m., about Hartley and the handkerchief and the vigil that lasted nearly 2 hours. She realized something. That night defined the Queen's character more than any ceremony, any speech, any official photograph ever could. A few months later, Hartley's daughters made a decision. They donated the handkerchief to the Imperial War Museum. It's now on permanent display in a small glass case in the World War II section. The museum label is simple: white linen handkerchief. Borrowed 1944. Returned 1997. Kept forever. The label mentions the Queen's hospital visit. The story is finally public. Visitors pause in front of the case. They read the story. Some of them cry, not for royalty, for human kindness, for a moment when duty became something else, something deeper. Matthews visited the exhibit once. She stood in front of the glass case for a long time, looking at the white linen, the 2 sets of initials, the faded bloodstain that had never been washed away. Time 0T5s. An object that survived a war, that outlasted secrets, that proved compassion was possible even in the most rigid systems. The handkerchief remains in that glass case. Ordinary white linen, royal monogram on one corner, a wife's initials on another, a bloodstain from Normandy. 2 women who loved one man, decades apart, connected by thread and memory. People walk past it every day. Most don't stop, but some do. They read the label. They understand. What happened in that hospital room at 3 a.m. wasn't about monarchy. It was about finishing something, about honoring a promise made in 1944 and kept until the very end. The Queen didn't have to come. She came anyway. Hartley didn't have to wait 53 years, but he did. And when they finally met again, in that quiet room, with only a nurse watching through a crack in the door, something impossible became real. Duty completed. Promise kept. Handkerchief returned.